lovers, it is G-Swiss here, and I'm here today to give you some recommendations of series that go beyond a trilogy. If you didn't know, this is a 7 on Sunday topic, and I am the host of 7 on Sunday. I will link the Goodreads page down in the description where you can check it out and you can participate in a topic in the future, or you can suggest a topic. And today's 7 on Sunday topic is kind of a follow-up on our standalones, duologies, trilogy recommendation videos that we've done previously. I wanted to fit this topic into last year. As the end of last year was fastly approaching, I decided to do a lot more end-of-year topics and beginning-of-year topics and other seasonal themed topics throughout the last few months. So we're finally getting to this topic right here, and that is longer formed series. So the recommendations in this video will consist of longer series starting from quartets and moving up from there. I also do have to note that every single series I'm mentioning in this video I have finished, so I can recommend the entire series because sometimes I do change my mind at the last book, and that has happened a few times in terms of reading series. And also, so many more series that I'm reading these days are longer form series, like the Blood and Ash series or the Crave series. There are so many books in those series that, yeah, I would like to recommend them, and yeah, I'd like to talk about them. However, I can't recommend that series to you guys fully in particular in the context of like this video, because I want to be able to fully endorse a series from start to finish. So I guess without further ado, I'm gonna get straight into these recommendations. So I would like to start off with one of the most popular series here in... That's my book mail. The first series that I want to talk about today is one of the most popular book series that has been talked about here in the booktube community, but just in the book community in general. And this 6-book series essentially started something. Obviously, a universe within itself and all of the spin-offs that come off from it. There's also been a movie about the first book, and then it was a TV show. Oh my goodness, like I'm so happy I quit the TV show before I found out how it ended. The reason why I recommend this series, no matter how hyped it is because I want people to forget the TV show, and I want people to actually read the Mortal Instruments series. I'm not gonna lie, I don't necessarily like the writing in the first few books, and I don't even like the plot twist that's introduced in the initial first book. Honestly, I think that we could have really avoided that random conflict between Clary and Jace. I don't know, it just still doesn't sit well with me to this day. However, this is a series that I do highly recommend if you can push past that plot element. I think I appreciate the series the most, not because it's one of my favorites, because if I'm to be real, this is probably my least favorite series by Cassandra Clare. It's not bottom tier either, it's somewhere in the middle, because I really loved Sizzy a lot. They were my ultimate ship back in the day, and they still kind of are. I still absolutely root for them. I do appreciate the series for some elements, especially the nostalgia, but I appreciate the series even more because the television show kind of revealed to me what this series had potential to be, and it had the potential to be poorly written like that. So I'm actually happy. This series, as much as it doesn't have the best writing, it has a better foundation than the TV show. So I would recommend you read the series if you have watched the TV show, and if you're not sure, I would highly recommend you check this series out because it has a lot less plot holes than the TV show. And also, I guess it's just consistent, and you will appreciate it even more if you read the future books in the Shadowhunter world. I have a recommendation for all my high fantasy lovers out there who are wanting a young adult high fantasy that is not necessarily that simplistic, rather is intricate, and it has such an expansive world that I would highly, oh my goodness, I highly recommend the series to anyone who asks me for like an ultimate fantasy recommendation. The 7 Realms series by Cinda Williams-Chimer. I love this series so much. I'm not gonna lie, it does get hard to keep up with at times, and that is why I would recommend you visit the author's website. They have a character list on their website, and they explain which character is which and what character serves what purpose, because there's so many characters in the series and there's so much that you need to remember. So she has like an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF. I would highly recommend you would use that as a reference, especially if you're starting off with the Demon King or the Exiled Queen, like those 2 books. I reckon it's really good to have that character guide. I loved this series so much. It is slow, it does have those gradual moments, but honestly, it's one of those very well written, very well balanced series that you eventually fall in love with. I got so attached to these characters. I really wish that people gave this a try. I feel like this is very overshadowed, very overlooked when we're talking about young adult high fantasy. It's just one of those series that are so good and it really deserves more hype. And now I'm going to talk about something that's on the opposite side of the spectrum. I'm going to talk about an easier to read portal fantasy that I would highly recommend to anybody who's transitioning from reading middle grade to young adult. And that, my friends, is the Medoran Chronicles by Lynette Noni. And yes, you might be wondering, geez whiz, Lynette Noni, her name sounds familiar. Whatever books has she written? The Prison Healer series. But some of us Australians know her better for the Medoran Chronicles. I remember when I first heard about the series, I mean, I would always see it in bookstores, but I remember Jenna from Just a Little Bit Random pretty much raving about it, praising it. I'd see a few people talk about it, and so I decided I needed to get onto it. And yeah, it is a very easy fantasy series to get into, and I'm very much excited for when my little cousin, at the moment she's 10, and she's not yet reading young adult fiction, but I'm so excited when I can get her at that stage when she's more interested in young adult fiction novels, because this is the series that I would recommend that she transitions to. I would highly recommend to anyone who is just starting out reading young adult fiction from middle grade to go to the Medoran Chronicles. It does get dark. It does have its dark moments. It's not necessarily as dark as a lot of young adult series. That's why I wouldn't say that it's on the level of the Prison Healer. However, this book series is still quite enjoyable at any age. I would highly recommend it if you're just wanting a good plot, if you're wanting some great characters, if you're wanting some heartbreaking moments, and if you're wanting a series that doesn't necessarily hinge upon its romance. There is a little bit of a slow burn romance here, but I'm not gonna lie, I wish we got more of the romance. This being said, as I mentioned, it's pretty middle grade, transitional to young adult fiction friendly. And another 5-book series that I've got to recommend here is the Talon Saga by Julie Kagawa. I loved this series, and I understand why a lot of people don't see the need for this being a 5-book series, but I kind of just liked how much time we had with these characters. This is essentially a dragon shifter urban fantasy for young adults. However, I would more classify this to be some sort of dystopian that has to do with a rebellion with dragon shifters. It feels more like a dystopian than it does a fantasy. I would actually recommend the Talon Saga if you like any kind of dystopian novel. I'm gonna say it, if you do like Divergent, if you like The Maze Runner, if you like maybe even Legend, if you like those series, I reckon that you would like the Talon Saga. And I reckon that's why a lot of fantasy readers don't necessarily gravitate toward it that much, because it has that kind of dystopian intensity. Also, it kind of feels very modern. It is essentially a fantasy that takes place in the real world. I would recommend it for those who also like, not necessarily to be transported to a fantastical world, but more to read something that was kind of more contemporary, but does have those dragon shifter elements to it. Although I think that regular fantasy readers like myself can enjoy this book for what it is. I don't think I can make this video without talking about the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. I don't really need to mention too much or why I endorse it, considering that a lot of people do. I do recommend it though. However, what I do have to contribute to the conversation is the fact that I believe that this series is more catered toward young adult readers who want their next fantasy read. A lot of people will go from ACOTAR or will go from Crescent City and then read Throne of Glass and will say that it's not that great at all. And I can understand that. These were Sarah J Maas's first novels. She started off as a young adult writer. She moved up to being a new adult / adult writer. I can totally see the criticism there. However, I just reckon that this series kind of just works better for those who love reading young adult fiction. I'd say it does get mature more toward book 5. I would highly recommend this series if you haven't yet read it and if you are a young adult fantasy lover like myself. But if you are a new adult fantasy lover and if you are wanting some elements of new adult fantasy you don't usually find in young adult, I hate to say this, but this series by Sarah J Maas is not for you. If you are, however, wanting something that is cleaner and is more driven on the plot and is driven based on all these different characters and, you know, has Sarah J Maas's snarky writing style, then I would recommend it. However, these novels aren't as fleshed out as her newer works, and the first few novels in this series definitely have a different tone from the tone that we know her by now. But it still holds a special place in my heart because I essentially grew up with it. And speaking of throwbacks, I want to talk about Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. I have to say it, if I wasn't into Vampire Academy or if I wasn't into the Mortal Instruments series, I don't think I would be going through my paranormal fantasy phase right now. I talk about Crave a lot on this channel. I've been reading Blood and Ash, and I really love those books as well, but honestly, I feel like Vampire Academy set the foundation here. I like the idea of Vampire Academy, and I'm not gonna lie, this was probably the first outright vampire series I ever read. I don't think I've ever really been into vampire novels. They were kind of associated with shame from from where I came from, like all of my friends would just be hating on like the idea of Twilight or other vampire novels. And then you have like the media pretty much saying, oh yeah, teenage girls are reading vampire novels, and like, you know, they're essentially shaming people for reading anything with a vampire in the title or on the cover or whatever. And you know, I kind of get that. I feel like the Twilight movies and the publicity around that really did ruin the reputation for vampires. I mean, come on, I'm literally speaking when our Pats is trying to market his Batman movie and people are still like, oh, he's a sparkly vampire or whatever. We can literally never escape the Twilight phenomenon. Vampire Academy, however, I feel like it could never leave the shadow of Twilight, and now it's gonna get its own TV show. Kind of curious about it, but at the very same time, I don't know whether it's gonna be accurate or not. I liked the concept of this because it wasn't necessarily mostly about the vampire stuff. It was the idea of it being in an academy, and that's why I appreciate reading Crave, because Crave, as much as you could focus on like the parody of Twilight at some points, I really like the school setting. Honestly, I feel like the board school setting makes these series more exciting to read because these students are around each other more than they're around their families. They're technically with each other all the time, needing to be each other's family when their family is not around, essentially just being each other's ride or die and saving the world together. I like that kind of setting in my books, and so if you like that kind of setting in your books, then I would highly recommend you do try out the Vampire Academy series. I have only read the series once, so I don't know if I would like fully endorse it at this age, but what I do have to say is that I enjoyed it when I read it. I reckon if you are of young adult age like I was when I read it, I believe I read this at the age of 18 or 19, then I would definitely recommend you try this out and see how you go with it. And another book series that I read at the age of 19, 20-ish time was the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I really enjoyed this series when I was younger. I'm not going to lie, and I will flag this. This series does contain cultural appropriation, and if that's something that you're not comfortable with, I'm just letting you know. While I absolutely adore the plot and the characters in this series, I do think that that is very important to raise, so I'm raising it here right now. However, I really love this series because I believe that it revolutionized fairy tale reimaginings. I was gonna say fairy tale retellings, but essentially these are fairy tales reimagined into a completely different context. I believe that if we didn't have this series, then I don't think that fairy tale reimaginings would be as popular as they are today. This series essentially put them on the map for a lot of us. It put them on the map for me. I didn't think that I would enjoy fairy tale retellings or imaginings until I read this series. I fell in love with it, and so now essentially a lot of my TBR is consumed with fairy tale reimaginings. What I also like about this book series as well is that it's a sci-fi series. These covers themselves look kind of fairy tale-esque, but trust me, this series is a full-on sci-fi series. What I would have to say about that is if you do enjoy sci-fi novels, regardless of whether you like reimaginings or not, if you like fantasy, I still would recommend this series because it does have the fantastical elements of a fantasy. But if you're not a fantasy fan, if you are a sci-fi fan, I would still highly recommend you check this series out. Next, I want to bring up another series that I would recommend from an author that I previously mentioned on this list, and that, my friends, is the Iron Fae series by Julie Kagawa. I am only recommending the first series because that is the only series in this world that I've read. There are currently 3 series in this world so far. From what I know, it is really expansive, so I'm very much looking forward to reading the rest of the series. But I love this first series. It was actually originally meant to be a trilogy, but the 4th book is written in the love interest perspective, and it's his own complete story. And oh my goodness, this series made me so emotional. I could not stop reading it. I could not stop binging it. It was just so addictive, and it was definitely one of those series that I was happy to be locked down with. So I was in lockdown mid last year because of the circumstances with the new variant and everything. I'm really happy that I got locked down with some great book series, and the Iron Fae saga just happened to be one of those series. It entertained me so much, and I would recommend this to anybody who loves urban fantasy and high fantasy because the series does indeed take place in the real world. However, it does have a lot of fantastical elements that can be appreciated by people who do love high fantasy series. It is very much young adult, so I wouldn't recommend it to the new adult crowd. However, if you are fine with that, then I would definitely recommend you read the Iron Fae series. And a high fantasy series that I would absolutely recommend to everyone to read. Oh my goodness, read The Air Awakened series by Elise Kova. This series is so good. I know that Elise Kova technically gets more hype with their Married to Magic series. I feel like any kind of Hades and Persephone retelling or reimagining will get you a bunch of clout. It will get you a bunch of hype. But honestly, I really wish that more people were talking about the Air Awakened series. This series is so good. And if you like high fantasy sprinkled with some sorcery in there, guess what? This series is for you. I love the characters in here. I love the character development that they go through. I love the arc that Vala goes through herself. Oh my goodness, like so many heartbreaking moments with my girl Vala here. I love the series. I love the journey that she goes on. I love how strong and how brave and how capable she is. Words cannot describe how much I appreciate the Air Awakens Chronicles. I would highly recommend you check it out if you haven't yet, because it is really that good, and it is one of those independently published series that does get praise among the people who do read independently published fiction, but I don't think that it gets much mainstream praise. So I would highly recommend the Air Awakens Chronicles. I honestly feel like it hasn't gotten as much hype as the Married to Magic series, and that's quite a shame. The second last series I want to bring up here is the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series by Rick Riordan. This is a middle grade fantasy series. It is an urban fantasy series. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys know what Percy Jackson is, but I will still talk about it for the people who don't know. Pretty much, Percy Jackson follows a bunch of kids who are descendants of God and humans. So they're essentially demigods, and they go to this camp called Camp Half-Blood. And they have these really cool characters based on their father or mother, whoever was the god or goddess who essentially conceived them. And they get to stay in cabins with their half-siblings and everything. It's a very fun adventure, but at the very same time, it can get really dark and really adventurous real fast. Currently so excited because I'm currently in the process of getting my cousin a box set, and I'm so excited for them to read Percy Jackson so we can gush about it together. I've loved this series since I was 19. I did not read it as a child. However, the series kind of came out when I was a child. I believe the first book came out when I was Percy's age. I believe Percy's 26 right now. I'm 26 as well, and it's just really cool to be the same age as Percy. I love this series so much, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who is wanting to get into middle grade fiction, or is wanting to recommend something to their family member who reads middle grade, or someone in their life who reads middle grade and they don't know what to recommend them. Please, I would highly recommend Percy Jackson. I would recommend that you gift them Percy Jackson, or you just read it for yourself. I believe anybody at any age can appreciate Percy Jackson. I still appreciate him to this day. I cannot wait to reread this series. And speaking of Percy Jackson, the final series that I have to recommend here in this video is the young adult spin-off series to Percy Jackson, the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. I absolutely love and adore the series, and I believe that this series takes place when Percy is around 16. And I reckon that it's important to bear in mind that as much as we do love following Percy and Annabeth, this isn't necessarily just their series. This is the entire Heroes of Olympus cast's series. But don't worry, you'll get to know them throughout the series. I find them absolutely lovable. I love the Heroes of Olympus. I love all the characters. I love the action. I love the adventure. It does get darker in here, so that's why I'd recommend it to young adult readers, or people who are bridging themselves from middle grade fiction to young adult fiction. Would definitely recommend this series for that too. But it does get dark, and yeah, there are many heartbreaking moments in this series, my goodness. But I appreciate the Heroes of Olympus series so much. Like the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, this is also a 5-book series. It's a very good long-form series that I would highly recommend. There's another spin-off called The Trials of Apollo. I would recommend that one, however, I'm only 3 books into it, so I can't necessarily fully endorse it. But what I do have to say is, if you're not fully satisfied with that ending, don't worry, there's more. So I guess that's gonna be it for this video today, book lovers. If you happen to stay till the end of the video, leave me this fish emoji. I mean, we were talking about Percy Jackson, Son of Poseidon. I don't know, it just goes with the underwater sea aesthetic. It will also confuse the people who did not stay till the end of the video. If you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. Join the amazing community of book lovers. And also, I have social media. I'm at gswizzlebooks on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm also at Goodreads. That's www.goodreads.com/gswizzle. And finally, I'm at TikTok. I'm at gswizzle on TikTok if you want to follow me there for some bookish content. I love you, book lovers, and I will see you later. Peace.
Started out with half and I flipped it in a double. Started out with half and I flipped it in a double.